Chapter 9, Minds in Rebellion. The telepathic assault began as a whisper in the quantum network, so subtle that the Devourer collective mind initially dismissed it as background noise. But Veltar and his team of Luminari operatives were not trying to break down the network's defenses, they were trying to awaken what lay dormant within them. Robert watched the operation unfold through the command center's neural monitoring systems, seeing ghostly representations of consciousness as the Luminari telepaths made contact with converted beings across the battlefield. Each connection was a thread of light in a vast web of darkness, tiny sparks of resistance beginning to flicker in the Devourer network. Contact established with 17 converted beings, Veltar reported, his metallic form glowing with intense concentration. I can feel their original consciousness stirring. They remember who they were. On the tactical display, Robert could see the effects of the telepathic infiltration. Individual Devourer units were beginning to move erratically, their perfect coordination disrupted by the awakening memories of their original selves. There. Robert pointed to a cluster of converted beings near the primary landing site. That group just stopped advancing. They're fighting the control protocols. Not just fighting, corrected Dr. HFY Sci-Fi, her compound eyes analyzing the neural feedback data. They're winning. Look at these brainwave patterns, the original consciousness is reasserting dominance over the Devourer implants. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One of the converted beings, formerly a crystalline scientist based on its partially preserved body structure, suddenly turned its weapons on its own squad. The biomechanical horror that had once been a peaceful researcher was now using its intimate knowledge of Devourer technology to sabotage their operations from within. It's working, Veltar gasped, the strain of maintaining multiple telepathic connections evident in his fluctuating luminescence. The freed consciousness retains all its original knowledge and skills, but now it can use that expertise against the network. How many can you reach? Robert asked urgently. The network is adapting, Veltar replied. I can feel it trying to isolate the compromised nodes. We have perhaps minutes before it implements countermeasures. Robert watched as chaos spread through the Devourer ranks. Freed converted beings were not just refusing orders, they were actively working to free others, using their network access to propagate the telepathic liberation signal. What had started as 17 individual rebellions was rapidly spreading through the quantum entanglement system. Incredible, Dr. HFY Sci-Fi observed. They're using the network's own communication system against it. Each freed consciousness becomes a transmitter for the liberation signal. But the celebration was premature. The central intelligence that Veltar had sensed, the hungry presence at the heart of the network, was beginning to respond. Across the battlefield, converted beings that couldn't be freed were being systematically destroyed by their own side, their consciousness consumed completely to prevent further contamination. It's burning them out, Robert said in horror as he watched dozens of converted beings simply collapse, their neural implants overloading fatally. The network is choosing to destroy compromised nodes rather than lose control. We're losing them, Veltar reported, his voice tight with anguish. The entity is severing connections, consuming the consciousness of any being that shows signs of resistance. It's feeding on their despair as they realize they're about to die. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. While the telepathic assault had created temporary chaos in the Devourer ranks, the network was adapting with terrifying speed. Worse, the entity at the network's core seemed to be growing stronger with each consciousness it consumed. Pull back, Robert ordered. We've learned what we needed to know. No, Veltar replied firmly. There's something else. One of the freed beings is trying to communicate. It has information about the network structure, about the entity itself. Robert watched as one of the converted beings, its original form unrecognizable after extensive biomechanical modification, approached the Alliance lines. Its movements were jerky, uncertain, as if two different minds were struggling for control of the same body. Let it through, Robert decided. But be ready to fire if it's a deception. The converted being reached the Alliance perimeter and collapsed, its biomechanical systems sparking with electrical discharge. When it spoke, its voice was a horrible harmony of organic vocal cords and mechanical synthesizers. "I remember," it said, each word clearly an enormous effort. "I was Zethkara of the Void Singers. Before they came. Before they made me into this. What can you tell us about the network?" Robert asked gently, kneeling beside the dying being. "The hunger, it feeds on more than consciousness," Zethkara gasped. "It feeds on the connections between minds. Love, friendship, shared purpose, these are what truly nourish it. The more we care about each other, the more it can consume." The implications were staggering. The entity wasn't just feeding on individual consciousness, it was consuming the very bonds that held civilizations together, growing stronger with each active connection and carrying it devoured. "That's why they preserve our memories," Robert realized. "So we remember what we've lost, so we can feel the full weight of despair as we're forced to destroy everything we once loved." "Yes," Zethkara confirmed. "But there is weakness. The network requires quantum entanglement to function. If the entanglement can be disrupted." The converted being's systems failed before it could finish the sentence, but it had given them something invaluable, a potential weakness in an otherwise perfect system. "Quantum entanglement disruption," Dr. Thysera mused. "Theoretically possible, but it would require precise harmonics tuned to the network's specific frequency." "Can we generate such harmonics?" Kreshka asked. "Perhaps," Dr. Thysera replied. "The crystalline bioresonance chambers can produce quantum frequencies, and the luminary bioneural networks could provide the precise control needed. But we would need to get close to a major network node." "The command ship," Robert said, studying the tactical display. "That massive vessel at the center of their formation. If we can get aboard and plant a quantum disruptor." "Suicide mission," Veltar observed. "The command ship will be heavily defended, and once we're aboard, there's no way out." "Then we make sure it counts," Robert replied. "How long would you need to build the disruptor?" 6 hours, Dr. Thysera estimated. "Assuming we can access the deep fabrication chambers." "You have 3, Robert said as another explosion shook the command center. "The Devourers are pushing harder now. They know we're close to something." As the Alliance's greatest scientists raced against time to build humanity's last hope, Robert found himself thinking about the converted being that had sacrificed itself to give them this chance. Zethkara of the Void Singers, a name that would be remembered long after this battle was over, regardless of its outcome. The war for Zephyria was approaching its climax, but Robert knew the real battle would be fought not with weapons or tactics, but with the fundamental forces that held the universe together. They were about to attempt something that had never been tried before, the deliberate disruption of quantum entanglement on a galactic scale. If they succeeded, they might free billions of enslaved consciousness and deal a crippling blow to the entity that fed on them. If they failed, they would likely doom not just Zephyria, but every civilization in the galaxy. Robert Chen, former research scientist turned galactic savior, prepared for the most important mission of his life. The universe itself was counting on him not to fail. Chapter 10, The Quantum Gambit. The quantum disruptor was a marvel of hybrid alien engineering, combining crystalline harmonic resonance technology with luminary bioneural processing systems. Dr. Thysera and her team had worked for 72 hours straight to create a device that could theoretically sever the quantum entanglement bonds holding the Devourer network together. "It's beautiful," Robert said, examining the softball-sized device that pulsed with contained energy. The crystalline matrix at its core refracted light into impossible colors while bioneural filaments writhed with their own form of consciousness. "Beautiful and untested," Dr. Thysera replied, her compound eyes reflecting both pride and anxiety. "The theoretical models suggest it will work, but quantum mechanics at this scale is largely uncharted territory." Robert carefully secured the device in his equipment pack, trying not to think about the fact that he was carrying something that could either save the galaxy or tear a hole in space-time. The weight of responsibility was almost crushing. "Infiltration team ready," reported Commander ZYXTara, an elite crystalline warrior whose 4 arms were equipped with the finest biotech weapons the Alliance could provide. Stealth pods prepare for launch. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. While the main Alliance forces continued their desperate defense of Zephyria, a small team would use experimental stealth technology to penetrate the Devourer command ship. Once aboard, they would locate the central network hub and deploy the quantum disruptor. Remember, Veltar said as the team made final preparations, the command ship will be crawling with converted beings. Some may be partially freed by our previous telepathic assault, but others will be under complete network control. Trust no one you encounter. Robert nodded, checking his plasma cutter one last time. The weapon seemed pitifully inadequate against the forces they would face, but it was better than nothing. His real weapons were his scientific knowledge and the quantum disruptor. Everything else was secondary. Launch in 60 seconds, announced the pod bay controller. Stealth field generators at maximum efficiency. You'll be invisible to their sensors for approximately 20 minutes after deployment. The infiltration team consisted of Robert, Commander ZYX-Thera, 2 Luminary warriors with telepathic capabilities, and a crystalline engineer named Kethmore whose specialty was biomechanical systems. It was a small force to carry the hopes of multiple civilizations, but stealth required minimal numbers. 30 seconds to launch. Robert thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the quiet laboratories of Huygens Station to the command deck of an alien stealth pod preparing to assault an enemy that defied comprehension. His sister Maya would never believe the story, assuming he lived to tell it. 10 seconds. The pod bay doors opened, revealing the star-filled void where the Devourer command ship waited. The massive vessel was a dark wound against the stellar backdrop, its impossible geometry creating visual distortions that made Robert's eyes water. Launch. The stealth pod shot from Zephyria's underground launch facility like a bullet from a gun, its biomechanical propulsion system accelerating them toward their target at tremendous speed. Through the viewports, Robert could see the ongoing battle as Alliance forces fought desperately to hold their positions. Stealth field stable, reported Kethmore, his crystalline fingers dancing over biotech controls. Enemy sensors show no indication of detection. The command ship grew larger as they approached, revealing details that defied human understanding. The hull appeared to be made of crystallized void, a substance that absorbed light and reflected impossibility. Weapon emplacements dotted its surface like geometric tumors, while docking bays gaped like hungry mouths. There, Commander ZYX-Thera pointed to a maintenance portal near the ship's central hub. That access point leads directly to the neural processing center. If we can reach it, we'll be at the heart of their operation, Robert finished. Perfect position to deploy the disruptor. The stealth pod maneuvered carefully through the command ship's defensive perimeter, avoiding patrol craft and automated weapon systems. The alien vessel's defenses were formidable, but they were designed to stop conventional attacks, not infiltration by stealth technology they had never encountered. Docking successful, Kethmore announced as the pod sealed itself to the maintenance portal. Atmospheric pressure equalized. Hatch opening in 3, 2, 1. Robert followed Commander ZYX-Thera into the Devourer command ship, his environmental suit's sensors immediately detecting atmosphere that would have been instantly lethal to breathe. The air itself seemed wrong, too thick, too cold, with an underlying taste of entropy and despair. The corridor they found themselves in defied conventional geometry. Walls curved in directions that shouldn't exist, while the ceilings seemed to be both impossibly high and oppressively low simultaneously. Bioluminescent patches provided illumination that cast shadows in colors Robert had no names for. The network hub should be through here, one of the Luminary warriors whispered, his telepathic abilities allowing him to sense the flow of consciousness through the ship's neural pathways. I can feel the thoughts of thousands of converted beings, all focused on this location. They moved through the alien corridors with extreme caution, using crystalline biotech to mask their presence from the ship's internal sensors. The few converted beings they encountered were easily avoided, their mechanical movements predictable enough to allow the infiltrators to remain hidden. But as they approached the network hub, Robert began to sense something else, a presence vast and alien that seemed to permeate the very structure of the ship. The hungry entity that lived at the heart of the Devourer network was aware of their presence, even if it couldn't yet locate them precisely. "It knows we're here," Veltar's voice whispered through their communicators from the surface of Zephyria. "I can feel it probing, searching. It's drawing power from the network, growing stronger." "How much time do we have?" Robert asked. "Minutes, perhaps less. The entity is beginning to consume entire sections of the network to fuel its search. Billions of consciousness are being devoured as we speak." The horrifying implications drove Robert forward with renewed urgency. Every second they delayed meant countless minds being consumed by the entity's ravenous hunger. They had to reach the hub and deploy the disruptor before the entity could locate and destroy them. There, Commander ZYXTERA pointed ahead to a massive chamber filled with pulsing biomechanical conduits. The Neural Processing Center. The heart of their network. The chamber was a cathedral of living technology, its walls lined with thousands of neural interface pods containing the consciousness of converted beings from across the galaxy. Energy flowed through organic conduits like blood through veins, while quantum processing matrices hummed with the thoughts of the enslaved. At the center of it all was something that hurt to look at directly, a nexus of crystallized thought and mechanical precision that served as the network's central hub. It was here that all the stolen consciousness converged, here that the entity fed on the accumulated suffering of the conquered. "Deploy the disruptor at the base of the central nexus," Dr. THYSSR's voice crackled through their communicators. "The quantum harmonics should propagate through the entire network from that point." Robert approached the nexus with the quantum disruptor in his hands, trying not to think about the billions of enslaved minds surrounding him. Each neural interface pod contained someone who had once been free, who had once loved and dreamed and hoped for the future. As he knelt to place the device, Robert felt something brush against his consciousness, not the aggressive probe of the entity, but something gentler. The partially freed consciousness of converted beings, working together to shield his mind from detection. "Hurry," whispered voices that existed only in his thoughts. "It comes. The hunger awakens fully. We cannot hide you much longer." Robert's hands shook as he activated the quantum disruptor. The device began to pulse with increasing intensity, its crystalline core resonating with frequencies that made reality itself seem to vibrate. "Device active," he reported. "Beginning quantum harmonic cascade." The effect was immediate and devastating. Throughout the network hub, neural interface pods began to flicker and spark as the quantum entanglement holding the network together started to unravel. Converted beings across the chamber began to convulse as their consciousness fought to break free from devourer control. But the entity at the network's core was not passive in its defense. Robert felt its attention turn toward him like the gaze of a malevolent god, and suddenly the chamber filled with converted beings responding to its direct control. "We've got company," Commander ZYXTERA announced, her biotech weapons powering up as dozens of grotesque figures shambled toward their position. The battle for the network hub was about to begin, and Robert realized with growing horror that the quantum disruptor needed several more minutes to complete its work. They would have to hold their position against overwhelming odds, fighting for every second needed to free the galaxy from the devourer threat. As the first converted beings reached their defensive perimeter, Robert Chen prepared for the fight of his life, clutching a device that represented the last hope of countless civilizations. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance, and time was running out. Chapter 11, The Heart of Darkness. The converted beings attacked with mechanical precision, their biomechanical forms moving in perfect coordination as they responded to the entity's direct control. But Robert and his team were ready, their alien weapons carving through the grotesque figures with devastating efficiency. Commander ZYXTERA's four arms moved in a deadly dance, her biotech weaponry adapting in real time to counter each new threat. Crystalline energy blades extended from her forearms while shoulder-mounted plasma cannons tracked multiple targets simultaneously. "Quantum harmonic cascade at 20%, Robert reported, checking the disruptor's progress while firing his plasma cutter at an approaching horror that had once been a peaceful diplomat. "We need more time." The Luminari warriors were using their telepathic abilities to confuse and disorient the converted beings, creating momentary hesitations in their attacks that allowed the team to maintain their defensive perimeter. But for every enemy they destroyed, 2 more seemed to take its place. The entity is drawing them from throughout the ship, one of the Luminari reported, his metallic form flickering as he maintained multiple telepathic contacts. It's sacrificing entire sections of the network to stop us. Keth Moore, the crystalline engineer, was working frantically to reinforce their position, his 4 arms weaving defensive barriers from the ship's own biomechanical systems. "I can hold them for perhaps 3 more minutes," he announced. "After that, we'll be overrun." "Cascade at 40%, Robert called out, watching as the quantum disruptor's effects spread through the network hub. More neural interface pods were flickering and failing, their occupants beginning to break free from devourer control. But the entity was adapting, consuming the consciousness of compromised nodes to prevent their liberation. Robert could feel its hunger growing, fed by the despair of billions of minds as they realized freedom was within reach but slipping away. "It's burning them out faster than we can free them," Robert said in anguish, watching dozens of neural pods simply explode as the entity chose destruction over loss of control. "Then we make every freed consciousness count," Commander ZYXTera replied, her weapons carving through another wave of attackers. "Look!" Some of the partially freed converted beings were beginning to turn on their still enslaved comrades, using their intimate knowledge of devourer systems to sabotage the network from within. The chamber erupted into chaotic battle as former allies became enemies, the entity's perfect control beginning to fracture. "Cascade at 60%, Robert announced. "The harmonic resonance is destabilizing the quantum entanglement matrix." The effects were visible throughout the hub as massive biomechanical conduits began to writhe and spark. The network's crystalline processing nodes were overloading, unable to handle the quantum interference created by the disruptor. But the entity was not finished. Robert felt its attention focus on him personally, and suddenly his mind was filled with visions of unimaginable horror, the accumulated suffering of every civilization the devourers had consumed, the dying screams of countless worlds, the endless hunger that drove the entity to devour consciousness itself. "Robert." Veltar's voice crackled through the communicator. "I can sense what it's doing to you. Fight back. Remember who you are." Robert gritted his teeth against the psychic assault, forcing himself to focus on the quantum disruptor's progress. 80% complete. They were so close to success, but the entity's mental attack was overwhelming, threatening to drive him insane with the sheer weight of cosmic suffering. "I can't hold on much longer," Robert gasped, his hands shaking as he tried to maintain contact with the device. That was when he felt them, the consciousness of the partially freed converted beings, linking their minds with his in a desperate attempt to shield him from the entity's assault. Billions of liberated thoughts joined together, creating a barrier of collective will that held back the tide of despair. "We stand with you," whispered voices from across the galaxy. "For every world lost. For every dream destroyed. We stand together." Strengthened by their support, Robert managed to maintain his focus as the quantum cascade reached its final phase. The disruptor was now resonating at frequencies that made the entire command ship shudder, its exotic matter hull beginning to buckle under the strain. "Cascade at 95%, Robert announced. "Almost there." But the entity made one final, desperate gambit. Instead of trying to stop the disruptor, it began consuming the ship itself, drawing power from the vessel's exotic matter composition in an attempt to survive the network's collapse. "The ship is destabilizing," Keth Moore warned. "The hull integrity is failing. We need to evacuate now." "Not yet," Robert insisted, watching as the cascade approached completion. 98%, 99. The quantum disruptor reached full resonance, and suddenly the network hub exploded into brilliant light as quantum entanglement bonds snapped across the galaxy. Every neural interface pod in the chamber shattered simultaneously, releasing the consciousness they had contained back to their original bodies. Throughout the Devourer fleet, ships began to lose cohesion as their crews suddenly remembered who they were and turned against their masters. The perfect coordination that had made them unstoppable dissolved into chaos as billions of minds reclaimed their freedom. "It's working!" Commander ZYXTERA shouted over the din of collapsing technology. "The network is fragmenting." But their celebration was premature. The entity, driven to fury by the loss of its feeding network, began to manifest physically in the chamber. Reality twisted and warped as something that existed outside normal spacetime forced itself into their dimension. "Impossible," Robert breathed, staring at the writhing mass of crystallized hunger that was taking shape before them. "It's actually materializing." The entity was beyond description, a constantly shifting amalgamation of void and substance, thought and matter, hunger and satisfaction. It was everything the Devourers served made manifest, and its presence in normal space was causing the command ship to literally come apart at the seams. "All teams, immediate evacuation," Robert ordered, grabbing the spent quantum disruptor as the chamber began to collapse around them. "The ship is breaking up." They fought their way through corridors that were folding in on themselves, racing against the progressive failure of the command ship's exotic matter hull. Behind them, the entity's roars of rage echoed through dimensions, promising vengeance against those who had dared to free its food. "There!" Kethmore pointed to an escape pod bay that was somehow still intact. "We can reach the surface from there." As they crowded into the alien escape pod, Robert looked back at the command ship that was now visibly disintegrating in space. The entity's materialization had destabilized the vessel's fundamental structure, turning the mighty dreadnought into expanding debris. "Launch!" Commander ZYXTERA commanded, and the pod shot away from the dying ship just as it suffered complete structural failure. The explosion was visible from Zephyria's surface, a brilliant star that briefly outshone the system's twin suns before fading to nothing. With it went the entity's physical manifestation and the central hub that had coordinated the Devourer network. "Status report," Robert called into his communicator as their pod descended towards Zephyria. "Network collapse confirmed across all sectors," came Veltar's excited voice. "Devourer ships are losing coordination. Many are being taken by their freed crews." "It's working, Robert. The galaxy is free." As their escape pod touched down on Zephyria's surface, Robert Chen allowed himself a moment of exhaustion and triumph. They had done the impossible, freed billions of enslaved consciousness and dealt a devastating blow to an enemy that had seemed unstoppable. But even as he celebrated, Robert knew their victory was not complete. The entity still existed, somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, and the surviving Devourer forces would eventually regroup and adapt. The war was far from over. Still, for the first time since witnessing the destruction of Huygens Station, Robert felt genuine hope. The galaxy had proven that consciousness, creativity, and the bonds between sentient beings could triumph over even the most cosmic of horrors. The battle for Zephyria was won, but the greater war for the freedom of all life had only just begun. Chapter 12, Liberation. The aftermath of the network collapse was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Across thousands of star systems, Devourer ships suddenly found themselves crewed by the very beings they had been sent to conquer. Former victims became liberators as freed consciousness took control of the most advanced fleet in the galaxy. Robert stood in Zephyria's command center, watching the tactical display show the scope of their victory. Entire Devourer battle groups were turning on each other as liberated crews fought those still under network control. The perfect coordination that had made them unstoppable had become their greatest weakness. "Incoming transmission from Sector 7, announced a crystalline communications officer. "It's from a liberated Devourer cruiser. They're requesting Alliance coordination protocols." "Put them through," Robert said, still amazed by the speed of events. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing a being that had clearly once been Luminari but bore the scars of extensive biomechanical modification. Half of its face was metallic, pulsing with residual Devourer technology, but its eyes held the spark of genuine consciousness. "I am Velketh, formerly of the research station Helix Prime," the figure said, its voice a disturbing harmony of organic and synthetic tones. "I have been under network control for 47 standard years. My crew and I now control 3 capital ships and are prepared to join the liberation forces. Welcome back to the living, Velketh, Robert replied, understanding the magnitude of what he was witnessing. How many others have been freed in your sector? Thousands, with more awakening every hour. The quantum cascade continues to propagate through the network's residual connections. But we face a problem: many of us no longer remember our original homes. The Devourers have taken us so far from where we began that we are lost among the stars. Robert felt a pang of sympathy for the liberated beings. They had regained their freedom, but at the cost of everything they had once known. Home worlds destroyed, families lost to time, entire civilizations reduced to memories that might not even be accurate after decades of neural conditioning. We'll help you find your way, Robert promised. The Alliance has detailed stellar cartography data. We can help you locate your original systems, or find new homes if your worlds are no longer habitable. You have our gratitude, Velketh replied. And our loyalty. We have seen what the entity feeds upon. We will not allow it to feast again. As the transmission ended, Dr. HFY Sci-Fi approached with a detailed analysis of the liberation's progress. Her crystalline form flickered with excited energy as she shared her findings. The quantum cascade has affected approximately 60% of the known Devourer network, she reported. We estimate that over 200 billion consciousness have been freed from direct control, though many remain partially compromised. What about the entity itself? Robert asked. Is it destroyed? Unknown, Dr. HFY Sci-Fi admitted. Our sensors detected massive quantum disturbances when it attempted to manifest physically, but something that exists primarily outside normal spacetime may not be subject to conventional destruction. Robert nodded grimly. He had felt the entity's rage as the network collapsed, its hunger twisted into fury at being denied its feast. Something that had consumed the consciousness of entire civilizations wouldn't simply cease to exist because its feeding mechanism had been disrupted. We need to assume it's still out there, Robert said. Wounded, perhaps, but not destroyed. It will try to rebuild the network, and next time it will be prepared for our tactics. Agreed, came Veltar's voice as the Luminari commander entered the chamber. His bioluminescent patterns showed exhaustion from the telepathic efforts, but also satisfaction at their success. I can still sense its presence at the edge of perception, diminished but not eliminated. Then we use the time we've bought, Robert decided. Help the liberated beings organize themselves, rebuild their civilizations, prepare for the entity's eventual return. And we search for a more permanent solution. Over the following weeks, Robert found himself at the center of the galaxy's greatest refugee crisis. Billions of freed beings needed food, shelter, medical care, and above all, purpose. Many had been under network control for so long that they barely remembered how to make independent decisions. The Alliance worlds opened their borders to the refugees, but resources were stretched thin. Entire planets were dedicated to housing and rehabilitating the liberated beings, while massive construction projects began to create new homes for those whose original worlds had been consumed. Robert worked tirelessly to coordinate relief efforts, his scientific background proving invaluable in understanding the complex psychological and physiological effects of long-term network conditioning. He established rehabilitation centers, organized medical research into devourer biomechanical modifications, and helped develop new technologies to ease the transition back to independent life. But his most important work was with the liberated devourer ships themselves. The vessels represented the most advanced technology in the galaxy, and in the right hands, they could become powerful tools for defense and exploration. The ship's biomechanical systems are fascinating, Cathmore reported during one of their regular technical briefings. They're designed to interface directly with neural implants, allowing the crew to control the vessel through thought alone. With modifications, we could adapt them for use by unmodified consciousness. Do it, Robert approved. But be careful. We don't want to create new forms of dependency or control. These people have suffered enough. As the weeks turned to months, the galaxy began to stabilize into a new configuration. The alliance between the Luminari, crystalline, and human refugees evolved into a proper government, with representatives from hundreds of liberated species participating in governance. Robert found himself appointed as the first Director of Liberation Affairs, responsible for coordinating ongoing rescue operations and the integration of freed beings into galactic society. It was a job he had never asked for, but one he couldn't refuse. The work was rewarding but exhausting. Every day brought new challenges as different species with different needs and cultures tried to find their place in a galaxy that had been forever changed. Some adapted quickly to their freedom, while others struggled with the weight of memories they could barely trust. But there were victories too. Entire species that had been thought extinct were discovered among the liberated beings. Lost technologies were recovered from freed scientists who had continued their research even under network control. New alliances formed between species that had never encountered each other before their mutual enslavement. Most importantly, they were building something the entity couldn't consume, a true galactic civilization based on voluntary cooperation rather than enforced unity. It was messy, chaotic, and sometimes frustrating, but it was free. Status report on the Deep Space Monitoring Stations, Robert requested during one of his regular briefings with the Alliance military commanders. All stations operational, replied Admiral Kreshka, recently promoted from her previous tactical role. We've detected several small devourer groups operating independently, but no signs of network reformation. The entity appears to be dormant. Or learning, Robert cautioned. We can't assume it's given up. It's had eons to perfect its methods, it won't be defeated by a single setback, no matter how significant. As if summoned by his words, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. The long-range sensors had detected something approaching from the galactic rim, multiple contacts moving at impossible speeds, their energy signatures unlike anything in the database. New contacts bearing 287 Mark 15, reported the sensor operator. Configuration unknown, but they're definitely artificial. Estimated time to arrival, 6 hours. Robert studied the sensor data with growing unease. The approaching objects were too small to be devourer ships, but too advanced to be natural phenomena. Their speed and trajectories suggested purpose, intelligence, and most disturbing of all, they seemed to be heading directly for Zephyria. Alert all liberation fleets, Robert ordered. Full defensive posture. And get me a quantum resonance analysis of those contacts. I want to know if they're connected to the entity. As the Alliance prepared for another potential threat, Robert found himself thinking about the nature of freedom. They had won a great victory, liberated billions of consciousness, and built something beautiful from the wreckage of the network. But freedom, he was learning, was not a destination, it was a journey that required constant vigilance and renewal. The galaxy was free, but staying free would require even greater courage than winning freedom in the first place. Robert Chen, former research scientist turned galactic leader, prepared to face whatever new challenge was approaching from the depths of space. The liberation was complete, but the war for consciousness itself was far from over.